Class is in session once again, and this is a very special and important session of Cannon's class. I'm honored, I'm privileged to be in the presence of someone recently I've been able to call a friend, a leader, a confidant, and so much more. Director of Interreligious and Intergroup Relations at American Jewish Committee, AJC. The one and only Rabbi Noam Marans. Rabbi Noam, how you doing?
It's my pleasure to be here with you.
We are keeping 6 feet distance to be respectful of our pandemic and taking all the health precautions. And I appreciate you coming out of your home, coming out of quarantine to do this. I think that shows the importance of our dialogue and our conversation. You and I actually had a Zoom for the AJC that went viral, that we had an opportunity to touch on many different topics. And now to be here in person with you, as well as you brought some visuals for the show and tell portion of the class, because as we experience the high holidays, we are now in the time of Sukkot, correct?
Right, we're between Yom Kippur and Sukkot.
Yeah, Sukkot. So
my favorite holiday.
Right. I mean, as I know from the understanding, Yom Kippur, especially for me, the Hebrew approach to repentance and a new year and new beginnings and teshuvah and all of those good things that I've learned as of recently through my process of atonement. But I know nothing about Sukkot. So please, can we start there? Can we share about what we're about to see and what is Sukkot?
Sukkot is my favorite holiday because it has such beautiful, powerful action symbols that bring the family together and bring the community into one celebratory group.
Okay.
Sukkot literally means booths or tabernacles.
Nice.
And it refers to the historical reference that when the Israelites left the land of Egypt and traveled in the desert for 40 years,
right,
God housed them in portable Sukkot, in portable booths.
Oh, okay.
So
I can understand that.
All of the holidays reference back to the most important story of the Jewish people.
Okay.
Their redemption from Egypt and
Right.
their traveling to the Promised Land.
Right.
But it's also an agricultural festival.
Got it.
It's the end of the agricultural season. It's called the Chag HaAsif, the festival of the ingathering, in which we celebrate the bounty that was part of the agricultural produce
Right.
of that year. So you have both the historical connection by taking our meals in temporary dwelling places outside our homes. And if you go into Jewish neighborhoods, you can see in the backyards and the side yards, people putting up temporary, organically constructed dwellings
Right.
in which they eat. Some people even sleep in them, but mostly
Wow.
people eat in them. A little bit of a challenge during COVID this year.
Right.
Because they're like rooms
So
of sort.
backyard gatherings in a sense to
Right. And the most important thing, and then I'll show you some of these pieces, it's the holiday in which joy is accentuated more than any other holiday.
Okay.
And I think the reason for that, at least a good interpretation of that, we've just been through the High Holy Day season.
Right.
We've been through a very
intense.
serious period of 10 days of repentance.
Right.
Just a few days ago, we fasted for 25 hours.
Right.
No food, no drink. We were in synagogue all day long, focusing on prayer, on self-reflection. And then, before too long, we break out. And we say, this is not the whole story of life.
Right.
The story of life is the story of joy.
Indeed.
And celebration and family gathering and singing and praying with our tools,
Right.
our show and tell pieces.
Right.
So what we have here, if I may, for Sukkot, we have the 4 species,
Okay.
often called the lulav and etrog. I can show it around this way and to you.
Yeah.
And it's made up of 4. The middle is the palm branch.
Okay.
On the right is the myrtle. On the left is the willow.
Myrtle and willow.
And the fruit is the citron, known as the etrog.
Okay.
So this is sometimes called by its most famous pieces, lulav, the palm branch,
Lulav
and etrog.
and etrog.
So that's a shorthand for the 4 of them.
Okay.
The lulav, the etrog, the arava, which is willow, and the hadas, which is the myrtle. And they come together. We're commanded in the Torah to take these 4 species and use them in our celebrations during Sukkot. And we use them during our prayers, during the whole holiday of Sukkot, which is 7 days. And, we don't mess around. We don't do things briefly.
Yeah, I see that.
We do things extensively. And we make a blessing over it each of those days. But it's all the midrashic, the rabbinic interpretations about these elements that capture the imagination.
What is the significance in each one?
So some say that these are parts of the human body.
Oh, okay.
Now, I won't explain the male and female parts of the human body, but that's just one.
Yeah.
Another is the spine,
Got it.
the willow, the etrog is the heart,
Okay.
the myrtle is the eye, and the willow are the lips.
Got it.
You can't be complete without a backbone,
Right.
a feeling heart, eyes
Seeing and
that
speaking.
see in a good way,
Right.
and of course we know all the trouble comes from the willow.
When you speak.
When you speak.
I've experienced
We don't
that
know
quite a
anything
bit.
about that.
Yeah. Indeed.
And I'll tell you one other thing about these elements, which I really love, that it's about pluralism. That the world, that the Jewish people is made up of different people.
Yeah.
And that we all have to work together
The intersexuality
to be
of
in
it all.
one.
Yeah.
All of us as God's creations, despite our differences and despite our understandings. That to me is the most compelling.
The synergistic approach.
So you can see why it's my favorite holiday.
I do. I see you're quite passionate about it as well. So are there in this process, how is there a presentation, or is it, I know the holiday is over the course of 7 days. Is this something that is it done daily, that you pull all of this out during prayer, or
Yes.
is it just something that just should be exposed, like, Christmas time we have wreaths and trees? Is that
Right.
somewhat looked at as decoration?
Yeah. So we do celebrate the presence of the lulav and etrog, the 4 species, but we have a specific blessing that we have to make over the use of them once a day. And in the morning services, we use them. And during certain prayers around a collection of psalms called Hallel, which means praise,
Right.
we have wavings that we do
Oh, got it.
as part of our liturgy.
Right.
And it's very, very beautiful.
Right.
And profound and agricultural and historical. And misameach, makes people happy.
Right.
And, it's one of these holidays that has it all.
Love it. I appreciate it. I'm learning so much, and on this holiday, you've blessed me with a gift. As much as I love to read, and I just had the ability to finish Spiritual Radical, specifically about Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who, the only thing before I read this book, I was aware of him was kind of the guy that was in some of the pictures with Martin Luther King during, whether it was the Selma March, and just even times during that process, because I know it's been told to us during the times that there was an alliance between the civil rights movement of the black community and the Jewish community. So I got to learn so much more than he was just the dude in the picture with Martin Luther King. I heard about his experience, and actually he truly was a spiritual radical. I mean, as much as he stuck to the traditions of Judaism, he also kind of stepped out and spoke out quite a bit about bringing communities together, whether it was the Jewish community and the Christian community, speaking out against racism, speaking out against the Vietnam War, and then, of course, his own personal escape from the Holocaust, where he literally weeks away, I believe, and he was able to escape to London and then also to America through his process of education. He was teaching and leading in that process, and then, but unfortunately, he lost his mother, he lost his sisters to the Holocaust, and that in himself, he said he never even went back, because even just the ideas, it was powerful. I think it was a statement in there just saying, like, even just the air and the trees, all of that would just remind him of so much pain, hurt, and travesty, that when someone like that is personally affected, but then also changes the world through his process and through his voice, someone's truly meaningful in so many ways. I mean, I had the opportunity before this. I read the book about Rebbe, who they consider one of the most influential spiritual leaders. But I mean, if not greater, right there with him, I would say, Rabbi Heschel was up there for all of the work that he was able to do. So understanding all of the traditions, he was kind of a guy from your community that broke the mold a little bit, from my understanding. And so I appreciate you offering that up to me to dig in, because I think we could use this as some framework for you and I's discussion today.
It'll be my pleasure.
Yeah. So, man, where do I begin? One thing I found interesting in this book, The Spiritual Radical, was when he landed on U.S. soil, one of the first things he saw was a black man. And he had never seen one before, which I found, and this is in the 1940, right? I found that to be interesting to someone who, as soon as they got to America, and I believe he saw a black man in a position of servitude. I think the book talks about him maybe being, a shoe shining gentleman, when he landed at the port. But then even as he goes on to at the academic space, I believe it was I don't know if it was a seminary or if it was an actual Jewish college, but they had the workers there that would, make up the beds and provide the food were black individuals, and he actually befriended, one of the head workers, and who was of Christian faith, and they, learned a lot about each other, which I found to be pretty remarkable. But again, it goes back to say that as much as we say, and then even over that course of process, since he was here, he became really close with the black community. So to be introduced to black people, like just even as a completely different entity in 1940, but to create and step out to create a real relationship to where he actually was a symbol even within black culture, is a compelling journey in itself. But it also shows that there are polar opposites quite a bit. So there is a lot of room for misunderstanding. There's a lot of room for ideas that have to be explored and romanticized until you actually get to know one another. And I think that's what you and I are doing. I find it interesting to say, neither one of us knew of each other before the ordeal and the situation of that. At least you first were introduced to me when you heard of the tropes and propaganda from this very podcast of Cannon's class when speaking about your community. And then we had the opportunity to have many discussions since then and sit down and now we're dear friends. So again, a lot of times people are put in certain positions that seem like they would never be placed there, but it is truly destiny to actually do the good work. So I don't know. I connected with that in a big way because I feel like it's a very similar situation of what has brought us together. And there are many ideas which hopefully we can unpack today about our communities that have yet to be discussed. Even though like the majority of these books that I have here kind of deal with our relations in some kind of way. I mean, I have Shared Dreams that even talks about Heschel and King a little bit more, that another friend, Rabbi Schneier, put together. But we have everything from the spiritual radical from Heschel, but then we also have the radical King, who's also considered radical in his later life by Cornel West, which is a great book. And then even while we're even talking about Cornel West, the community has tried to come together before because even Cornel West and Michael Lerner had a dialogue on race, religion, and culture in America and titled it pretty much Jews and Blacks. So people have been trying to have these conversations and alliances for so long. Why do you think that there hasn't been a solid alliance or more camaraderie amongst the communities?
Well, let's go back for a moment for some context to Rabbi Heschel, because I think what you touched upon is instructive and is a model for us. And that's why I think it resonated with you. Heschel did not have any experience in relationships with black people.
Right.
And many of us are in our little corners.
Right.
And don't get beyond our boundaries.
Right.
And we know that there is nothing more significant to advancing human society than relationships across boundaries.
Right.
When you know people, you are less likely to mythologize or stereotype them because you see them as human beings.
It's hard to hate up close.
It's hard to hate up close. And I think that Heschel was also motivated by two key factors. One was a principle, and the other was an experience. The principle was that he could not conceive of a world which God had created, in which difference would ultimately be the criterion by which we were measured. No. The tradition says that we are all created in the image of God, right there in Genesis.
Right.
The Mishnah says that we were created as one human being, so that no one thereafter could say that my ancestor was more important than your ancestor. We're all from one source.
Right.
And we went off throughout the world, but we all came from the same. By the way, it's also intuitive philosophically that if we see ourselves as God's children, created in the image of God, no one is better or worse.
Right.
We're all equal.
So then
that way.
Where does the concept, is it in the Torah, the Talmud, or I mean just even as, again, from a layman's perspective, that the chosen people of Judaism, is that because that's what's projected when you hear about the Jewish community, is that they believe that they are the chosen people, but it kind of is a little contradictory to what we're speaking about now.
Certainly the concept of chosenness is in the Torah,
Right.
and it's understood by modern Jews in different ways. But even already in the Torah, it's not just arbitrary, it's a commission.
Right.
What's the commission? That you will be role models, that you will be a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. You have to live up to that,
Right.
to that challenge. And in addition, the Bible is full of references to God's choosing of other nations.
Indeed.
Even in the book of Amos, I think it is, Halo kivnei kushiyim atem li. You are just, to me, the Jewish people, like black people are to me. Because he was remonstrating, moralizing against the Israelites regarding their mission and said, there are lots of people
Right.
and lots of different responsibilities, but clearly all of God's creations. The most important evidence of this is that the Bible doesn't begin with the Jewish people. The first 11 chapters are about humanity and what God's relationship is to humanity. And then there's the story that's particularist to the Jewish people, but it's particularism in the service of universalism.
Right.
If it's particularism as an end in and of itself, it's useless. It has to be in the service of a wider humanity.
That's how you discover yourself, is through servitude.
And the second thing that I wanted to say about Heschel is that in addition to his commitments philosophically, he was committed to black-Jewish relations because he understood persecution. He fled persecution. In fact, some of the persecution was imported from the United States to Germany.
Right.
The definition of race, we now know, was lifted from racist corners
Yeah, the eugenics concept.
in the United States.
Yes.
And he came here to this country with not only his philosophical commitments, but his personal experience, because a persecuted people cannot stand idly by while another people is being persecuted.
Right.
Why? It's the wrong thing to do. Second, because hatred is an equal opportunity offender. They
Right.
might start with racism,
Right.
but they'll make their way to anti-Semitism. They might start with anti-Semitism and they'll make their way to racism.
Right.
And the issue that you asked me about is about relationships. You and I came into contact with one another because of a crisis. So many times, the best relationships emanate from crises,
Indeed.
between groups, between faiths. We brought Heschel, American Jewish Committee brought Heschel into the process. My legendary predecessor, Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum, brought Heschel into the process to help fix the relationship between Catholics and Jews. And we consulted with and advised the Catholic Church, and Rabbi Heschel was our representative there because he believed that there was a possibility to save Jewish lives. He had just experienced the Holocaust, and he knew what the foundation of the Holocaust was, animosity towards the Jewish people. But he went into that lion's den because he knew that that's the people with whom you have to make a change.
Right.
That's the same thing here. That whatever challenges we have in the black and Jewish community, people like you and me have a responsibility. We were thrust together. We now have an audience that's listening, and we're going to role model what that looks like.
Indeed. And that always takes me back, and I'll frame it this way, and then I'll ask the question. But I learned something pretty powerful. So if you don't heal the wounds, you'll bleed on people who didn't even cut you. And there's a lot of wounds. But a lot of times we don't know where to direct that energy, specifically in 2020 where so much has gone on. We're not even talking about history anymore. We're talking about current events that we wake up daily and we see the lynching, the lack of care and compassion for black bodies, where people are allowed to be murdered in their sleep in a bed and there's no repercussions. If there's no justice, and the definition of justice is, they get punished for the shots that missed, or for disturbing the white neighbor, as opposed to actually the annihilation of a black body. So with those things being perpetuated to this generation, when I have to explain certain things to my own children, I'm not talking about history at this moment. As important as Heschel is, to my children, that's going to be foreign. That's even Martin Luther King is foreign to them. But they know who Breonna Taylor is. They know who George Floyd is. And in this time, we need the Heschels of today to step up and assist us in this fight, not only for freedom, but just for humanity, to be treated like human beings, and a lot of times there's been those ideas of, oh, there is no more racism, or why do we bring up the past? Well, we're dealing with current events right now to where it is quite evident that there is no respect for the black community. So what tends to happen in the crisis that had occurred from a conversation that went global, I understand the hurt that I caused, but it was coming from a place of hurt, and really a place of attempting to heal hurt, because the conversation ultimately was, all of these things have been said about us, but as a community, as a people, we must come together and do away with our own personal tropes, our own personal theys, our own personal blaming, or almost the idea of this mythological boogeyman that
Right, a scapegoating.
Yeah, and that to me it was really a conversation about empowerment that went in a direction that no intentions whatsoever to hurt others, but only to build up one's community and to go through the process of, okay, we've heard this, but let's actually say there is no boogeyman, there is no issue. We gotta strip away these brainwash ideals and dogmatic approaches that have been placed upon us, that we were feeble-minded, that we were lesser than, that we were savages, that we weren't, that we didn't come from kings and queens, and almost having a similar, I want to use the term correctly, but lineage or heritage or tale even of, we come from greatness as well. We believe that we are chosen as well. And they're in that sense that as two communities that have been persecuted and oppressed, that there has to be more things that bind us than separate us. And for whatever reason, that wasn't the message that broke through. And I find it even now in this conversation that you and I are having. I heard you reference they, when we're saying they look at us in the same way. They have the same amount of hatred for the Jewish community that they have for the black community. Right now, I feel like it's super important to define the they. Because if we don't define the they, then you become they, I become they, in this battle for hatred. And I think that's where my conversation went wrong, because I don't believe there was any point where I said, Jewish people hate us and I hate Jewish people. but that was a message of anti-Semitism and bigotry that was put out there that I had to then combat to say, okay, I absolutely definitely don't feel that way, but still now we're negating the fact of why the conversation wasn't occurring in the first place, because now I'm distracted and have to fight someone who should be my ally to even for clarity to then get back to whoever this they is. And I think that's the issue. And I say, as you know, the Torah, the Bible, they all teach that, you know, the devil is the author of confusion. And if you can create as much noise, then you'll never have to worry about getting to the source of the issue at hand.
Well, I think we can define the they.
Please, let's define it.
We're living in a moment in U.S. history where white supremacists are feeling empowered.
Yes.
And they are a threat to both the black and the Jewish community, but more importantly to society at large.
Right.
Because we are perhaps examples of the recipients of the threat, but it's a threat to all of society because it negates the humanity, the divinity of each individual and their divine right to live
Right.
and prosper. So I have no problem being clear about that. So when I speak about equal opportunity offenders,
Yeah.
they would be at the top of my list right now.
Now that's interesting to me because, and I'm not even certain how you identify. I don't, because what I've learned and I feel like I've always innately understood that Jewish isn't a race. You know, it's a people, it's a culture, it's a way of life. But race, and as I break race down, is similar to what we see as breeds. So to say white is a race, and it's almost the normative gaze. It's been established that, you know, there's white and then there's everything else. What I find interesting is that a lot of people within the Jewish community, and even specifically the Ashkenazi Jewish community, can identify as both. You can be white and Jewish, and that's almost even what I've learned even within the Jewish community. There's a hierarchy of that too, and that sometimes is deemed at the top, and, you know, everything from Sephardic and Ethiopian and all types of Jews.
Hundreds of thousands of Moroccan Jews living in Israel.
Right. So are looked at as lesser than even within the Jewish community. So there's a white supremacy ideology even within the Jewish community. And I think that is where some of the tropes live. And then we can get into even the how to get rid of those, because a lot of that stuff is connected to some very, very heavy ideas that are just embedded in the world.
I would be careful about using the phrase white supremacy as a principle in the internal life of the Jewish people.
Right.
And let me explain. It is true that there is a history of condescension, even within the Jewish community. It was part of the challenge in the early years of Israel, where we had East European Ashkenazi leaders and then migrations of Jews of color.
Right.
And it took a while for the generations to catch up to the educational and societal attainments. But now a lot of that is beginning to disappear.
Right.
My brother made Aliyah. He moved to Israel, and he has a Moroccan daughter-in-law.
Right.
So a lot of the changes that are happening by having experiences one with the other
Right.
will ultimately be overcome. Is it moving as fast as we'd like? Perhaps not, but it is moving in that direction. There are also some issues within the Jewish community that Jews of color are invisible.
Right.
And we're well aware of this challenge, and it must be addressed.
Right.
Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, a good friend of AJC, the rabbi of Central Synagogue.
Right.
You know, she's an Asian American rabbi.
Right.
Her Yom Kippur sermon this year was about Jews of color.
Right.
And the need for the Jewish community to get its act together in making sure that people sitting in the congregation are comfortable. People sitting at the leadership table are representative of one another. And
Right.
you are also correct when you say that a lot of American Jews understand themselves as white.
Right.
The point I was making is that the equal opportunity haters
Right.
don't allow themselves to believe for a moment that Jews are part of them.
Okay.
And therefore, blacks and Jews are the same to them. They
Right.
are other.
Right.
And in the case of Jews, that they're involved in liberal immigration policies that defile America.
Right.
The two murderers who mowed down Jews in Pittsburgh
Yes.
in 2018, a wake-up call, if there ever was one, to American Jewry that anti-Semitism was no longer a thing of the past.
Robert Bowers, who had on a MAGA hat, I believe.
And then a few months later in
Poway.
Poway.
Poway in San
and then-
Diego.
And then other examples in Muncie and in Jersey City and in Brooklyn. All of these examples, some of them were motivated by right-wing extremism,
Right.
which literally in their manifestos said, we have to kill these people because they're the ones allowing or encouraging or facilitating undesirables to come into this country,
Or even-
specifically Muslims.
Even Charlottesville, one of the chants in Charlottesville was the Jews will not replace us.
Right.
And I had opportunity to sit and talk with Richard Spencer, one of the people who were the coordinators of the alt-right experience there, and you could tell he's remorseful and regretful for what that became, where even in his existence he was just trying to preserve his identity. And it goes all the way back to me for what this dialogue is about, and even how I got entered into this place was these were identity politics. These were things where people identify and people feel attacked because not only whatever we're speaking about at the moment, they identified with that and felt that their identity was being attacked. And it goes all the way to, the persecution of Jewish people goes truly to the core of we identify as these people that have always been on the raw end of the deal and never and really becoming the enemy or the one thing. I think Barry Weiss talks about it in How to Fight Anti-Semitism is like whatever bad thing you want to be, you can blame it on the Jewish people. You can whatever society aspect, they'll always be the cause of all the malice, and that's the trope.
There's anti-Semitism on the left, on the right, in the name of religion.
Right. So how do you get to that space though, and knowing, as disciplined and all of the reverence that, the Jewish community has for their traditions and for God, where does it get misconstrued throughout the years? And even, I believe Heschel deals with this very well in the book, to where if we are a persecuted people, how did we ever get, when we overcame the process of oppression, how did we then turn and begin to oppress others? And because and it's specifically in America, there are examples of that. Specifically, with the black community, because it's not like we just pulled the ideas out of thin air. One of those processes, I mean, like I said, I've joined a long list of people who have been deemed as anti-Semitic, and it becomes even, whether it's James Baldwin or Martin Luther King, and really once the misunderstanding got cleared up, it was like, I think James Baldwin said it best. He's like, I don't hate Jewish people by any means. He's like, but I do hate my landlord, and he just happens to be Jewish. And he goes on to express the reason why he hates his landlord is because he felt like he was put into slum situations where the pipes weren't working, it was rat and roach infested, and so many things. So he had to gear his hate towards a they. And he didn't want to generalize an entire community, but he still felt like he was being oppressed by the person who owned the building, and they just so happened to be Jewish.
We have to acknowledge this.
Right.
And in Baldwin's construct, it might not be the perfect construct, but is the key to our ability to discuss these matters.
Right.
If the demonization is because someone is a Jew, it's not acceptable.
Right.
So when someone's Jewishness is relevant, that's one thing. But if their Jewishness is not relevant to what they're doing, then it cannot become an expanded stereotype for all peoples, for
Right.
all people within that group.
Right.
So if someone in one community does X, that's one thing.
Right.
But if we expand that to a generalization about everyone in that group, well, that's bias, discrimination, stereotype, racism, anti-Semitism, whatever the case may be.
You see, we throw all of those titles in there at once, and it's like, I feel like we got to specify because, and I think one of the actors, Ozzie Davis, said, even specifically speaking about stereotypes don't necessarily have to be hateful depending on what the person who's delivering the stereotype is doing with it. Right. In that process, you can, even the idea of races, to discriminate through law and power is where racism actually occurs. To be prejudiced or to prejudge is we all have that ability to make assessments about it and generalizations about communities. But if you're never in a position of power, really, what harm are you doing besides expressing your opinion? And that's where I found myself, and I feel like that's where we have a lot of work to do for regardless of what you believe, if you're actually hurting people, right, that is the core of it. That's what, if there's evil, if there's hatred within your statements, your sentiments, your expressions, then that's what we have to do away with that. There's no reason to hurt others, but specifically an oppressed people. And I find it interesting because then we talk about Heschel and Dr. King's relationship, but early on, even in the 50s, there was certain statements, and Dr. King said it himself. He very almost similar to Baldwin's statements, where he said, the meat in my community is more expensive than the meat in Stone Mountain. And when he was saying Stone Mountain, that was the white community in Georgia, but he was saying the butcher that he has to go to, he knows the quality of the meat wasn't as good as the quality, and he as the meat in Stone Mountain, and he referenced the butcher in his neighborhood being a Jewish man. And that was looked at as anti-Semitic from Dr. King. So it's interesting that clearly we know it was a great alliance, it was a great relationship. We talk about, all that was done, but because someone raises a topic of where they feel like they're being disenfranchised or oppressed, that it's instantly saying, well, that person's anti-Semitic or that person's a bigot, when they're just expressing their truth or what they know their truth to be, even if it is a generalization of an entire community, because for whatever reason, we have been taught that that there is power within the Jewish community. There is intellect in the space of finance in the Jewish community. Whether we don't look at these things as tropes, as almost even we look at these things as admirable. As a black community, we look like, man, how can we get power like that? How can we rally together and receive reparations? How can we be more financially intellectual in order to have businesses in other communities to where we can benefit off of the needs of others? And if that expression is in rallying our own looks at as hateful speech, it's like, all right, well, what can we say? What are we allowed to speak on? Because by any means, I don't think it's our goal to hate another group of people when we can't even get our own stuff together. We're trying to figure out how not to hate ourselves.
I think expressing admiration for the accomplishments of the Jewish people in this country, where they too experienced persecution for a very long time, and where we thought that anti-Semitism had disappeared but now is back.
Right.
And as you know well, the persecution included glass ceilings, restricted neighborhoods, restricted covenants, inability to get into businesses, into hospitals. And by the way, there was assistance from the black community.
Yeah, Howard University was a great example of allowing Jewish doctors to learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know a lot about historically black universities and colleges of America, which is a very, very important story of enfranchisement
Absolutely.
by blacks of Jews. By the way, let's also mention in that regard, since it doesn't get enough mention, the black military men who liberated concentration camps.
Absolutely.
So
Spike made a film about that.
Yeah. So these are things that we must mention so that the extremist voices are not the ones that carry the day.
Yes.
You and I need to represent the great middle, in which we remind people of the shared history and the shared promise.
Yeah.
And therefore, we can have an honest conversation about these things.
Yeah.
There's definitely bad water under the bridge. We can't
get past it.
We can't ignore that, and we have to talk openly and honestly about it.
Right.
Where you and I first locked horns,
Yeah.
and I think you got this very early on, and really was why I wanted to and was willing to engage with you and become your friend, and I saw that you could be the key to opening up. You called it a sacrifice. Forget the sacrifice. How about the door that opens? How about the key that unlocks?
Right.
That's a better one.
I like that.
You said things, you said in your apology that I wanted to lift up my people, but I realized I was doing it at the expense of another people.
Yes.
Well, in addition to it not necessarily being historically accurate in a generalization, more importantly, it allows the real reasons to be evaded of why there's racial injustice in this country.
Right.
And the racial injustice is real.
Yes.
And it's way bigger than black-Jewish relations.
It is.
Because those who would persecute or bias or discriminate, they were doing it to both of our peoples over times in different ways. By the way, never would I compare in the United States.
Yeah.
The persecution of the Jewish people to the persecution of African Americans.
Yeah,
But we're not
we
in
never want to play the
we're
oppression
never
Olympics.
in the oppression Olympics, but I understand the difference. It's important for me to say that.
There's two persecuted people. There's the minorities of America, all the way from the indigenous people to everyone. There is a ruling class.
Right. So the challenges are very, very real
Yes.
regarding racial injustice, and we could disagree about how to resolve those, but I don't think that serious people are in disagreement about the problem of racial injustice.
Yeah.
They can see it with their own eyes.
Right.
They can experience it in their lives. They know that it's there.
Right. But I think almost to the point, especially because we're speaking to the next generation, who we talk about the importance of history. Again, history is there, or even like, as I know, there's no Hebrew word for history, but there's a Hebrew word for remembrance, and the importance of that
You
is
showing off your Hebrew again?
Yeah, come on, just a little bit. I don't even want to mess it up. I know it's
Zikaron.
There it is.
Maybe you're testing me.
Exactly, but that's in remembrance, and the importance. I love this of the Hebrew faith and the practice of Judaism is so you don't make the same mistakes, and you acknowledge that there was pain and suffering of my people, therefore that I can exist today. And we have that same thing with our ancestral belief in the black community. So and it goes back to simply say if the surviving lions don't get to tell their story, then the hunters will get all the glory. And as we know, winners write history the way from their perspective. And so for us to find our truths is difficult, because for so long, for generations, we have been told that we are lesser than. We have been told that our history begins with slavery, and it's a difficult role, because then you find yourself dancing around tropes like the Jewish involvement in slavery and the significance, how much of it is true and how much of it isn't true. But if we completely deny and say there was none, that's just as bad as saying that all of the entire Jewish community or all of the Atlantic slave trade was purpose or caused by the Jewish community. Neither one of those things are true. But again, when you're dealing with propaganda and you're dealing with the idea of conspiracies, all you need is a kernel of truth to be able to believe the extreme. So I personally feel like dialogue like this obviously is helpful, but if we're doing away with tropes, if we're doing away with hurtful rhetoric, we have to atone from both sides. And that's what I believe. I would have to say I definitely believe in my situation the Jewish community in droves came out to be quite helpful, but it's almost like I see others perpetuate the ideas of bigotry and want to see the division, and want to say, well, look at Nick Cannon, or look what he did, and how can he still be able to do this, and why does he still get to keep that? And from both sides, I look for people who want to operate in that low frequency of cancel culture and using people as an example. There, unfortunately, there were people from the Jewish community initially, especially, who wanted to see me made an example of. And that to me, and what that means to our community, when you hear a black man's being made an example of, that's synonymous with public lynching. That's synonymous with, that's the purpose of seeing a black body hang in a tree, because now you've scared the entire community is know your place. Otherwise, that will be you. So we got to be delicate in how we deal with these manners, because when you use terms like make an example of, or someone even said to me, prominent within the industry, have you learned your lesson? When you say, like, well, what is my lesson exactly? Because those type of things, as much pain and hurt that I may have caused, you can perpetuate that and cause even more.
This is a good moment to introduce you to someone whom you may know about. Do you know the name Krister Stendall?
I don't.
Krister Stendall, a very important person in the history of interreligious dialogue. He was the long-term dean of Harvard Divinity School. You know, I know you're at Howard Divinity, but I've heard of this other school, Harvard.
Howard, Harvard, yeah, same thing.
You know, a lot of the same letters, but I'm not sure how much more. And he was a Swedish theologian, and he articulated 3 principles of interreligious dialogue which could apply very well to this intergroup dialogue. By the way, you and I are unique because we're not only involved in a Black-Jewish dialogue.
Right.
We're involved in a Christian-Jewish dialogue.
Absolutely.
Because your roots are Christian, and we would need another whole session on that.
Right.
But we talked a little bit about when we spoke about Heschel and his role with regard to Christianity.
Right.
But he said 3 things as the 3 principles, Stendhal's principles of interreligious dialogue, and they're very important to articulate here. The first one was, allow the other to describe their narrative for you. Don't describe the other's narrative on their behalf.
Powerful. Powerful.
You and I are engaged here in telling the story of our people.
Indeed.
You're telling your story and all of its hurts and joys, and I'm telling my story and all of its hurts and joys, and that's the way it should be.
Yes.
The second, I think, is equally important. Don't measure your best against their worst. Another way of saying that is, let's not be at the ends of the bell curve.
Right.
Let's get into the middle of the bell curve.
Right.
We don't want the extremists who, forgive me for the color analogy, who speak in black and white.
Right, right.
We like the people who speak in gray.
Right.
The people who are less certain.
Right.
The people who are able to engage in dialogue. Let's not allow extremists, which we have in all of our communities. No one is immune from it. We know who they are, and we're not going to allow them to determine what the narrative and conversation is. Right. And the third one is the best one. Leave a little room for holy envy.
All right, I received that.
What do you see in my community that you love?
Right.
What do I see in your community that I love?
Right.
I'll tell you what I love in your community, and then you tell me what you love in my community. I led a very sheltered life, Nick. I grew up among Jews. I went to Jewish schools. I went to college, and because of the percentages there, I was able to travel with Jews. I did have some non-Jewish relationships in college, and then I went to rabbinical school. You know, not so many non-Jews in rabbinical school.
I think everyone's Jewish there.
And then I go and become a rabbi, not far from here, in a essentially historically lily-white town that had a growing African-American community.
Right.
I loved going to church.
Sunday.
Especially to the black churches.
Yeah.
Where they knew how to pray.
Right.
Where they knew how to be unencumbered. Where they didn't worry about what someone was thinking about them.
Yeah, Heschel talks about the black church in that manner.
Where it became the social and the social justice fabric of the community.
Yes.
That is the role model that we're looking for. And the Jews tried to emulate that and do it in parallel. Who is in the streets these days? Who among the protesters, including me?
Right.
Jews, committed Jews, observant Jews.
Right.
And when there was a Muslim ban, Who was at the airports?
Yeah.
Visible Jews
Right.
who were protesting it with signs, "Let my people go,"
Right.
using the biblical tropes. So that's what I admire
Right.
in your community. Tell me what you admire in my community for our listening audience.
Absolutely. I would say there's a Zulu term called sawubona. I think that's what we're talking about. And that means I see you, therefore you see me, and we see the greatness in each other. Or even we go even further to say what namaste actually truly means is the God in me recognizes the God in you. And in that process, I recognize the greatness, the divinity, and the discipline of the Jewish community. I've had the opportunity to have Shabbat, in the past few months a few times, and I'm pretty much say like Friday night, y'all have Thanksgiving every Friday night. It's pretty.
We need to exercise a lot.
But it's amazing because I see so much love, respect, reverence, discipline, and ultimately divine nature. I see the God in the process of. I think everyone should practice that on however levels, whether it's Orthodox Reform at what level, to say, you know what, we've had a busy week, but on Friday we're gonna cut all these phones off, we're gonna cut these TVs off, and we're gonna spend time with our family. We're gonna dress up, we're gonna eat good, we're gonna talk about your week, we're gonna spend, and even within my own children, I'm like, man, we got to do this, and it's almost pushing that reset button. It's almost tapping into that teshuva every single week that I feel keeps people going. I feel like that would help so much so, but I recognize that in a way to anyone who has the religious discipline to disconnect from the world and society and what others on that hamster wheel, that rat race of always going, to step back and say, let's spend time with God. Let's spend time in prayer. Let's spend time in servitude to each other. Man, that's to be commended and to be praised on a level of that's truly divine nature.
The single greatest influence on my life was the Friday night dinner table.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I think that should have to be a requisite, a required notion for all families. If I don't know how we could do that. I mean, there's so many laws that are enforced upon us, but if there is a way that everyone in the country should have to practice Shabbat and cut everything off and sit down and spend time with their family on Friday nights, I think the world would be a better place. So I definitely say that's what I love about your culture. And that's just one discipline. But I think, again, going back to, our dialogue about the reverence, a lot of times it is that holy envy that you speak about that can be misconstrued when it's a people who want the success. There's to watch how the Jewish community has overcome oppression in a way that is unprecedented, to where you can see how horrible and really disastrous the Holocaust was, when at the time to see over 6 million people be taken off of the planet in such a violent and despicable way, and then the amount of Jewish people currently is still a very small number, but how, as very careful as I could possibly be, how powerful that community has become because they're so tight-knit, because they have these disciplines, because they now have to look out for themselves, because there's not a lot of them, but to see in many industries that they have dominated, in a sense, to whether it is Hollywood, whether it is certain areas where, again, like I've learned through the process of,
Right.
that banking was something that wasn't looked at as a good thing, and especially to the Christian community when we talk about, there were certain ideas where you weren't supposed to handle money, so we'll let the Jewish people do the lending, we'll let the Jewish people do the banking, but for now, when how that looks, that's power. That's something that we admire, to say, man, how can we have an understanding of finance like that? How can we come together and have our own communities to where our voices matter in times of voting, where we can receive reparations for the hurtful things that have been done for our community. And I think it's, from my perspective, it is nothing but reverence. It is nothing but appreciation and respect. But again, for whatever reason, to your community, if not positioned the right way, it can be deemed as hateful and hurtful and cause pain.
Because the same things that you just said,
Yeah.
where I know you,
Yeah.
I love you,
Yeah.
I know what you have learned in the last several months,
Yeah.
I know that you're not saying them in anything other than a reverent way.
Right.
But you also understand how, with even the slightest change in tone,
Right.
that could be understood in a different way.
100%.
And the word power sometimes can be misconstrued.
Right.
Power over someone.
Right.
So we have to be extremely careful
Yes.
when we talk about that, but we don't say that all of these conversations are off the table. We just have to be aware
Right.
of how fraught.
And contextually, because and what I have learned, if I could share, the reason why, because even to me it was like, well, why don't they want to be powerful? Why don't they want people to know that they have power? What I learned is, even through things like the protocols to the learned elders of Zion was a horrible propaganda piece of literature that was put out there that inspired the ideas of the Holocaust and inspired Hitler, that because the Jewish people were so powerful in spaces like finance and banking,
Or the myth of it.
the myth of it, it was then used against them that the Jewish community was the cause of the fall of Germany after the war, after the First World War. Therefore, we have to do away with all of the Jews because it's their fault. Their myth of wanting to rule the world, we have to do away with them. And that goes all the way back to, like you said, biblical principles of Jewish people are Christ killers. And for always having that's to me where anti-Semitism really lives, in that space of, you want to blame an entire group of people for a complete myth, and not just blame them, but annihilate them for your own white supremacy. That is why we can't, or that's why that trope of Jewish people being powerful is so hurtful and so problematic.
Correct. And thank you for elaborating on the point that I was making.
Yeah.
And I think that
And that is because I know a lot of people, they ask me that question all the time.
Yeah, look, I'm a proud Jew.
As you should be.
I'm proud of what
Different from a proud boy, as we know.
Did we have to mention them?
I mean, just in that sense, because of where we are.
We are, I know.
Yeah.
We're not going to allow the extremes to destroy America.
Right.
We're not going to allow it.
Right.
You, me, all of us.
Right.
We're going to protect the great middle of America.
As we should. The gray areas.
The gray areas, where, Christian Stendall told us to focus our attention
Right.
and not let the extremists determine what the future is going to be, whether we're on the left or the right, or in the name of some perverted understanding of religion,
Right.
whatever it may be. I think that we have been given a gift.
Right.
We have microphones.
We do.
You have a microphone by the power of your fame.
Yeah.
I have a microphone by the power of working for a great, respected,
Organization.
far-reaching
Yeah.
American Jewish committee.
Yes.
If we continue to do this, it will have an impact. If we go to each other's places of pain, you know,
Right.
the Jewish Hasidic parable, do you love me?
Right.
Of course I love you. Do you know what hurts me? I don't know. Well, if you don't know what hurts me, you don't love me.
If you don't know what hurts me, you don't love me. That's powerful.
Write that
That's a
down.
bar.
Write that down in your
That's
book.
a bar. If you don't know what hurts me, you don't love me.
So that's what we need to learn about one another. But it cannot be in the hands of those who will use it to scapegoat, who will use it to divert attention from what the real problem is. So I need to go to your places of pain.
Yes.
You need to take me to the African American Museum.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been there, but I need to go with you.
But Rabbi, we ain't gotta go to the museum. We go right outside. We go to certain neighborhoods,
Right.
that where the pain is currently happening.
I mean, there are certain things we can do even with distancing.
Yeah, we can go. Yeah, we can go to Newark and take a walk.
And when we're traveling,
Yeah.
you and I,
Yes.
we're going to go to the places that we need to fly to
Yes.
and to show other people what it means to know another person's pain
A true
as
alliance.
part of their collective history.
Yes.
And then we're going to come up with ideas of how we can role model fixing things. What do we need to do in the Black-Jewish relationship?
I love it.
Do we need to go to the Jewish and Black educational institutions?
We have to.
And fix them in how they are understanding
Or build this curriculum and this dialogue so the next generation can fix it, because it's not even for us to fix it. I don't believe it's for us to facilitate and be conduits for the next generation to fix
Listen,
it.
you know, when I was a young man, I wanted to fix the world.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, I decided to fix myself.
Bars.
I skipped a few steps in the telling, but
Yeah.
that's another
it.
one of these.
That's another good one. That's
another one of these Hasidic tales, I
We
think.
call that bars. We say that when you say something good, you teach, and that's a bar right there.
So we're not going to fix the world. We can role model for others and get the legions behind us. You can bring other people into the process who have the kind of fame that you have and are open to this kind of conversation. And we will be able to make a difference. Look at the difference we made in just a couple of months
Right.
on the responses that we got. The extremists did not like our conversation.
They did not like it at all.
Both communities.
Yeah. They were like,
Maybe a little bit more in your community because you were seen as kowtowing or something like that.
kowtowing, butt breaking, all the names that they called me.
But I never, and I think we can look at every word that I've said and every word I've written about this, never said anything like that to you.
At all.
Because I saw that you meant it and that you weren't just doing it to check the box.
Right.
Well, we're not the only two people for whom this could be possible.
Right.
We're doing it at the American Jewish Committee in different ways with our Black Jewish Caucus, with our Black Jewish Unity
Right.
Week, hashtag Black Jewish Unity. Go to ajc.org and see all the things that we were doing. Our joint support of the No Hate Act.
Yes.
Go online today and tell your legislators
Please.
that, I mean, your community, my community, more hate crimes on the basis of race directed at American blacks.
Yeah.
More hate crimes on the basis of faith directed at American Jews.
Yes.
If we're not working together on this, shame on us.
Hey, I'm saying hate is gonna win when we can't allow hate to win.
So the possibilities are infinite.
Yes.
And keep writing your book reports. Keep.
This one's coming next.
Edward Kaplan's going to get a bump in his sales, and I didn't even speak to him before. They may have to put out a new edition, and the 100 pages there about Heschel with Interreligious and the role that the American Jewish Committee had in that, the finest hour.
Yeah.
I just gave a talk about how our model with Catholic relations is our model for all of our intergroup
the entire
relations.
world.
Why?
Yeah.
Because it couldn't have been much worse.
Mm.
And now it's among the best.
Wow.
It doesn't mean it's perfect,
Yeah.
but there's communication.
Indeed.
And we use that model for our Black Jewish relations, for our Muslim Jewish relations, for our Latter-day Saint,
Right.
our Mormon, so speak, Mormon Jewish relations, for our Latino Jewish relations. Know one another, find out what hurts one another, and work together on those things that we both share in common.
I love it. I feel like, we have quite the journey ahead of us, but there's a great roadmap. There's, whether it's Heschel, whether it's King, whether it's the situation that we're currently in, we know what we need to do. And I think, getting rid of the tropes, getting rid of the propaganda, getting rid of the rhetoric, but still dealing with the pain. That was a powerful thing that I learned today when you said, if you don't know what hurts me, you don't love me. And we need to understand what hurts each other, where the hurt lies, where is that pain, and then how to mend it and heal it so we can move forward, so we can continue to trudge along on this journey for the next generation to get to that promised land. Even if we don't get there initially, it's definitely there for us and that alliance to actually do it all together. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate your words of wisdom and the opportunity for us. We didn't discuss everything. I think we have to do this again. But I think we touched on many things and it's not even about the semantics or the specifics of, well, you didn't ask him this, or you didn't say this, or what about this, or is he really sincere? Or is it like all of those things? I think you can see the energy here of two individuals really trying to operate out of love and understanding. And we'll get to everything that we need to get to, but ultimately we're doing it to truly unify.
Can we end with telling about this?
Please.
We can't blow it inside.
Right.
But we'll tell our viewers that I'm going to blow it outside.
Yes, and I the first time I saw it was actually during the first process, probably a couple of Sundays ago.
On Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, on Rosh Hashanah at a synagogue, and it was remarkable. So I look forward to us doing it after this. But you could go ahead and.
So this is the shofar.
Yeah.
It's a good thing to end with.
Yeah.
We spoke about the joy of the lulav and etrog and the 4 species and building the booths and the agricultural festivities. This is most closely associated with the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, because it's the holiday of Truah, of the sounding of the trumpets, of the sounding of the shofar, and it's connected, a ram's horn, to the story in Genesis 22, one of the most profound stories in the Bible, in which Abraham is commanded to sacrifice his son, and just at the last minute, God sends an angel and provides a ram in the thicket. I like the word thicket.
The thicket.
you gotta extricate yourself from the thicket. That's what we're doing here, not only for ourselves but for others.
Yes.
And that became the symbol. For the new year.
Indeed.
And for waking up people.
Yes.
With a horn.
Because they're loud.
Maimonides said, Uru yishenem mishenatchem, wake up you sleeping people and do your repentance. But what a lot of people don't know is that the shofar had other uses.
Okay.
They were sounding the shofar for a call to war,
Right.
to gather the people. Not the best thing, but
Right.
part of history.
Right.
But at the Jubilee year, the shofar was sounded on Yom Kippur.
Right.
And we do that reminiscence. At the end of Yom Kippur, we sound the shofar to end the fast
Right.
as a reminiscence of the liberating of slaves in the Jubilee year.
Mm-hmm.
That everyone was able to go back to their original families and that lands and debts
Wow.
were canceled.
That's
and,
powerful.
And that story of the shofar is in the context of the chapter of proclaim liberty throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof. Ukratem dror ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha. The inscription on the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So when we sound this shofar in a few minutes outside your home,
In remembrance
we're going
of freedom.
we're going to be proclaiming that we believe in that aspiration of America,
Right.
and we believe that it is not yet completely fulfilled, and that we have a responsibility to make sure that we get to that day
Right.
when it is complete.
There it is, and I love it, and I can't wait to express it. But, and I would just end, even talking about the spiritual radical and Rabbi Heschel and his relation with Dr. King was a great alliance, and I feel like to be able our alliance that we've created for this generation, even within these conversations, not to say that it's on that level by any means, but it is reminiscent of two communities. And I think one of the things that I've been standing firm on is something that Dr. King said, that the ultimate measure of a man isn't where he stands during times of comfort and convenience, but it's those moments of challenge and controversy. And I feel like there's many people who stood by me. Well, I don't say there's many people. There's many people who didn't stand by me. there's a lot of people who fled for the hills, or were kind of stepping back and didn't want the I don't even want to say what it the aura that the negativity could have produced. But then there were a few people who did stand by me and help me during these times of challenge and controversy. And I definitely would say you are one of those people.
And my organization.
Yes, and the AJC definitely. And I'm appreciative in the sincerest form for that. And I think it shows your personal character, and it shows the true measure of the AJC and the goals in unifying and bringing people together. So I say that to say thank you. And like you said, it's just the beginning of a journey that will be ongoing. It's not a quick fix. It's not something, like you said, we're not just checking boxes, but as brethren, we're taking this mission in life to unify and to bring people closer together. So this has been another great, the heart. This has been another great session of Cannon's class, and I thank you so much, Rabbi Noam.
It's my pleasure, Nick Cannon, my dear friend.
Indeed. Class adjourned.